Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. Welcome to Unless, the podcast, inspired by that Dr. Seuss quote from the Lorax that reminds us of the role we can each play in making the world a better place. Join Dr. Hemma Lomax and her guests as they share incredible stories of being moved to decisive action and perseverance, leading to tangible impact at scale. This podcast is a production of Corporate Compliance Insights.
I think that communications represent the most honest form of data. It's what people say when they think they're just doing their job. They're not overthinking it, like when they're filling in a form. The natural flow of communications, I think it's generally between humans, is the most honest form of data.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Unless the Podcast. I am thrilled today to introduce you to Dean Elwood. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Umony. He's a serial communications entrepreneur, having spent more than 2 decades building and leading teams at the intersection of telecoms, compliance, and artificial intelligence. Known for a pragmatic, customer-led approach, Dean works closely with financial services leaders and regulators to translate complex requirements into clear executable plans. But the reason I wanted to bring Dean to you today is that he is a CEO that cares. I've had the good fortune of meeting his team, meeting his partners, and they've shown me that culture building is possible with the tone at the top. So Dean, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Unless the Podcast.
Thank you, Hemma. Thank you for having me. Great introduction. Got to live up to that now.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Dean, what we've talked about how at the heart of every organization are its communications. The words, the tone, the messages we send each other every day, they reveal the truth of human behavior, often more than policies or reports ever could. You've dedicated your career to capturing and unlocking those truths. So what first drew you to the world of communications, and why did you see them as central to building trust and accountability?
I think that communications represent the most honest form of data. It's what people say when they think they're just doing their job. They're not overthinking it, like when they're filling in a form. The natural flow of communications, I think it's generally between humans, is the most honest form of data. And I remember thinking about this a long time ago, thinking about how networks carry more than just signals, more than just data packets. There's intent, trust, the first sign of something going wrong. I've always found that really fascinating. And I think on policies are what you want people to do or what you want people to not do. But I think communications reveal what they are doing. And that's where the two, I think, need to meet, particularly in the world we're in, where regulators and firms, if they're serious about trust, need to see those two things meet.
Dean, this resonates with me so much. As you know, I used to be a criminal barrister on my feet in criminal court defending humans who had been accused of breaking the law. And certainly much turned on the rules, much turned on what could be proved. But we knew the truth was always in the communications. It just wasn't possible back in those days. Gosh, I'll age myself now, at least 2 decades ago when I was doing that, to show the context in the way you described and like you said, the intent, the context, the previous behaviors and what happened. So I really love this focus on truth in communications. What was the moment you realized that was the gold mine?
That's a really good question. I think maybe it was LIBOR. It was the LIBOR scandal. So that's what, 2008, maybe? It must be coming up for 20 years ago. That was the first time, and probably because it hit mainstream news. That was the first time I heard those recordings. And I remember that this went undetected for a long time, despite what I knew, which was that there were very clever systems looking at markets to detect manipulation, looking for spikes and signals in market data and transactional systems. And I remember thinking to myself, that's fascinating that those sophisticated systems missed that. But you listen to the phone call and there's a guy saying, keep it high on stream for me. There's a case of Bollinger in it for you. Or I think one of them, there's $100,000 in it for you. I'm like, how did you miss that? And I think that was probably a very revealing moment of, wow, if we could get access to that data in real time or near real time, that would never have happened. I think there was another case similar that followed where it was an Irish bank. I can't remember the name of them now, where the CEO was recorded saying all kinds of things. Do you remember that one? I can't remember the name of the bank, but there were a couple of examples, LIBOR and that one that happened around 2008, 2009, that I thought, wow, there is gold in here.
Yes, the truth is trapped in that data, or at least it was back then. And we started to see these weak signals of what was possible. I think the regulators probably spotted that as well.
Yes.
Because definitely since then, obviously technology has evolved. We'll talk about your part in the evolution of technology here in a moment, but also the regulators have realized that if it is possible to capture those communications, perhaps companies should be thinking about doing that and not just capturing them, but analyzing them. One thing I want to pick up and underscore, you said it quickly, but I want to iterate it for our listeners. You said if it could be caught in real time, it would never have happened. And so we're not just talking about catching these things after the fact to have good evidence for prosecutions, like when I was on my feet in court. You're saying, I think, that actually those signals in the communications can be used to prevent wrongdoing. Is that what you're saying?
I think it would have prevented the scale of it.
Yes.
There's always, the first one is, or the first couple are always likely to get through. But as soon as it's being flagged and it's on someone's radar, it can be shut down. So the whole libel thing became systemic, industry-wide, very large name brand banks, right? This wasn't one rogue individual. It became cultural. And I think that culture of bad behavior is something that could have been steered back onto the right path had we known about it early. One or two, the first couple would have got through, been detected, and then things changed. And it wouldn't have got out of hand in the mode that it did.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. And look, at the heart of this is culture, right? A lot of us, I'm in a profession of ethics and compliance, a culture builder, I like to call myself. But we really do need to think about how the culture is showing up in the way we speak to each other. And we can see that whether it's wrongdoing, whether it's good, green flags, red flags, it's all there. I love that. Now, you have a background in telecom. So how did that prepare you for tackling human behavior through data, compliance, and even now artificial intelligence?
I think it's about having a technical depth to understand how to capture it.
Mm-hmm.
A almost philosophical understanding that behind every packet of audio there is intent, there's a human. Behind every packet of audio, there's a human, and there is therefore some kind of human intent. And I think a law background prior to that told me that regulation forces you to see the implications of that intent. And I think it's those three things coming together that fascinated me and brought me more into the technical side of telecoms. I think it's probably more than just the background in telecom that is a background to my understanding of human behavior. I think it's the coming together of a whole lot of things. AI is the great example now, right? So now that background of those three things is meeting AI, and wow, that's a whole other game changer around taking noisy, unstructured intent and turning it into something what you would call actionable. What's the phrase you use?
Actionable. Decision, useful information. Yes. Actionable data or actionable insights. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think telecom, the telecom technical background is great from an understanding the art of the possible. But I think actually without a bit of law, bit of philosophy and other things, it probably wouldn't all come together in quite the same way.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because your real skill, I think, despite your varied experience, has been spotting the patterns and connecting the dots between those different things, understanding that human behavior can be influenced, not just monitored. So I love that. So okay, you've put these dots together. You've realized there's an opportunity here to influence human behavior at scale and build culture and help prevent and detect crime, fraud, whatever it might be. But this is not a simple area, right? So, you set out to uncover the truth in communications, a lofty goal, but you quickly run into complexity. You've got regulatory requirements, cultural resistance, and this sheer volume of human behavior in motion. I mean, you talk about telecoms. I mean, I don't know how many hours I spent on the phone when I was young, but gosh, if you then multiply that by the number of humans in an organization or the number of humans in a jurisdiction, we're talking about a lot of complexity. So how did you navigate the complexity of this? Let's start with that.
How do we navigate the complexity of that? I think it starts with technical products that help firms spot check data. As you say, the volume of it is until very recently, it was just impossible. No firm can monitor 100% of all of its communications. So the best you can do is spot check. And I think historically firms have used tools like lexicons to try and filter out what you might really want to be looking for. But I think they're not really fuzzy enough. Human language is such a fascinating thing. We've got so many different ways of saying the same thing. A lexicon's never going to be perfect. And they, as you know, they produce a lot of false positives. And I think that's been That's been the status quo for a long time around how do we manage it? Well, we'll spot check it and we'll use a lexicon to try and float up to the surface the things we want to be looking at. I think now that whole game has completely changed with the advent of generative AI. And it is now, for the first time, truly possible to monitor 100% of all communications and float the really interesting, risky stuff to the top. I think the way that that's approached needs to change. The old model, lexicon-based random sampling, was really around looking for bad stuff.
Right.
And I think there's a shift that needs to happen where if you're looking at 100% of all of it, and you're looking for intent, you can actually just as well surface the good stuff. And I think this puts us on a really interesting journey around compliance as not being seen so much as a surveillance or a control, but actually it's there to protect. It's not a big brother. It's there to help you. This fits in very nicely, I think, with the narrative you have of is it the Office of No? I keep forgetting the phrase. I'm sorry.
We're trying not to be the Office of No as a compliance professional, more the Office of Unlock. Yes, no, I agree. I agree. We have a bad rep as compliance professionals. And like you said, surveillance and monitoring is not the most popular thing we do.
No. So can we flip that? Can we flip that perception from not the most popular thing, but to we notice all the good things you did today.
Mm-hmm.
You did a great job today. No one's listened to your phone calls before unless you're in some kind of a training program, right? So how does my boss know that I had an amazing call with that person, or we did an amazing deal, or you know what, I did a good thing today. I actually had to declare out a conflict of interest. I wasn't allowed to wall jump, and there was meant to be an information barrier in place, and there wasn't. So the call came through, but I killed it. That kind of thing to me is really interesting, and I think that's the cultural shift that needs to happen. The technology is there to underpin it, but there's a cultural shift that needs to happen. We're not doing surveillance to catch bad guys. We're doing surveillance as much to show everything that we're doing right and to give our employees a safe environment. We can train them. We can spot things early, that kind of thing. It's a cultural mental shift, I think, isn't it? As much as the technology is there now.
The technology is there, but you're right. I feel so much, much more interested in and sit taller when you tell me what I've done right. And, maybe this idea of monitoring isn't so scary when that's actually part of the package, right? I think I've been on quite a number of calls where I've been told that the call will be recorded and it says, for monitoring purposes, but as long as they emphasize more the improving of the call of the customer support as opposed to the monitoring of anything I've done wrong, I feel happy with it. I'm okay with that. So I like that idea of flipping it.
Because it's there to protect you, and that's the mental shift we use. So it's almost like surveillance is the wrong word now. I feel like we shouldn't be using the word surveillance. There's a negative connotation, whereas most firms will call it the surveillance department. And I think that is something also that needs to change. I think that the whole naming, the whole process and culture needs to be flipped more to be like your Office of Unlock.
Yes, or like you said, useful insights, intelligent insights, training insights, whatever it might be. But yes, I'm with you. But of course, the truth is, as I said, there were massive interest from the regulators in this, probably since LIBOR and beyond. Massive fines in the last few years for financial institutions that don't adequately record, collect, and store this information. So, what challenges have you faced in persuading firms and regulators that communications data wasn't a risk to be hidden, but a resource to be mined responsibly?
Yeah, there's a few. There's a few challenges. Fear of exposure. There's an element of safety and not knowing what's in there, or perceived safety. I think it's a fallacy, but there's a perception that, I don't know about it, or don't have to report anything on it. In the same light, a little bit of fear of the regulators, I would say. There's a little bit of cultural pushback, but we're seeing less of that now. I think it's mainly around fear of exposure and fear of regulators. Again, for me, it comes down to reframing it. So what we say to a firm in response to that is we say, you've already got the risk.
Right.
You've already got the risk. The choice actually is whether or not you see it. And we think you really ought to be seeing it. And I think from the regulator angle, there needs to be almost this amnesty that we are starting to see, I think you mentioned the recent fines, in the last round of fines, can't remember whether it was SEC or FCA ones, but there were a bunch of firms, I think it was about 8, I think it might have been off-channel comms again, and 5 of them got fined and 3 of them were named but were not fined. And the reason stated for not getting fined was they were taking all efforts to try and deal with this. They had to go. And I think we're going to see more of that type of amnesty from the regulators. But I'd love to get your insight from that as an ex-regulator. But if I were a regulator today, I would be thinking, how can I make it okay, A, for banks to come to me and volunteer that they have a problem without being scared to death, which B, encourages them to have a go and try these new technologies. And you know what? If they try the new technology and it doesn't work, but they come along and say, I did my best, look at everything I did, at least you won't get fined. You might still get named, but I think the reputational damage of being named and not fined is significantly less than, $100 million fine.
Correct. No, you're right. It's a great tool that the regulators can use to nudge behaviors, isn't it, really? To say, look, work with us, show us that you're not wanting to be willfully blind. Then if you find something, but you've done that because of your extra efforts to look, we will recognize that and, reward it in some sense or form. It's not a reward, but it's certainly mitigation. And again, a signal to the industry that the government regulators, the enforcers want to work with us.
Yes.
So that we can all build healthy cultures and prevent and detect, what we would probably say was the rogue trader or the rogue employee. Well, if that's the case, then let's prevent and detect that happening together. And no, I agree with you. I mean, again, I can't speak for my time at the SEC. I can't speak for them officially, but I can definitely say, I like to remind people there was a 3-part mission. Capital formation and healthy functioning markets were part of the 3-part mission. The other is protection of investors. And so the regulators really do want to see us having healthy functioning markets. That's why they're focusing on the financial institution. They don't want fraud. They know that we don't want fraud. And they like to see the developments. Now, the governments are not going to necessarily, not always, but they're going to be behind sometimes when it comes to the technological advancements. They're going to want to know that what's the art of the possible, to use your phrase. And I love that. They're going to want to know what's possible because that shifts the definition of willfully blind. It shifts the definition of a business judgment. I used to say a good business judgment is a defense. But, often if you could say you didn't have the resources to look at every communication, how could you possibly be expected to collect it? That might have been true a decade ago, but with companies like yours, we're showing that it is within our reach to get that information and see not only the red flags, but also, to your point, and I love this point, I want to go into it a bit more, show that we actually have an effective compliance program in place because we are monitoring, we are looking, and maybe 99% of the communications show that we've got a healthy compliance culture.
Exactly right. I mean, if you focus in on the bad stuff, the red alerts, then your relationship with the regulator is adversarial. By definition, if you're focusing on the whole package, the good, the bad, the horrible, the brilliant, then actually it's one of collaboration. And I genuinely think when I speak to regulators and ex-regulators, I genuinely feel that they want a collaborative relationship with the firms. They want that. I think the firms still feel it's adversarial. And I think that's where the shift can come from. It's in surfacing the good stuff and not just having to deal with the regulator about all the bad things.
Now, I just want to talk a bit about the good stuff. You obviously are not just a tech genius, but you're a CEO yourself with a team of employees. And I wanted to ask you, how do you lead your team to approach compliance as an act of protection and care and not punishment? I mean, you get this chance to model this behavior yourself as a CEO. So tell me a bit more about how you run your company with these thoughts in mind.
I think it's culture. Culture's led from the top. That's inevitable. I'm not sure how I even do that with my team. The only way I can really answer that is to tell you how I think about it. And actually, something sprang to mind. We got a new neighbor, met a new neighbor for the first time last week. And I've had this before when I'm explaining what it is that I do. And inevitably, you end up diving a bit deeper than you really wanted to go to, because it can be a hard thing to try and explain to someone who knows nothing about regulatory compliance or banking. And so I explain what I do. And the immediate reaction is, how many bad guys do you catch?
Yes.
And it's not about that. And then I find myself trying to explain our job is not to catch the bad guys. And you know what? If it was, we'd always fail. It's a whole game of cat and mouse that the cat's never going to win that game. So it's actually our job is to provide tools to the good guys to enable them to cover their backs and prove to the regulator that they're doing the right things. Back in the law, my dad used to say to me, I remember this, he said, paper over the file, so that when there's a law society audit, in January, and they're going through it, have you got, every telephone call with your client there's a note on the file, paper over the file. And I remembered that. And I think that's the culture I try and bring into the team and into our business is we're not here to catch bad guys. We're here to make sure the good guys have got all the tools they need to prove they're being good guys. It's that simple. And I think that maybe comes out somehow in the culture, but I don't know how.
No, I think that's so powerful as well. Just think about I think about that all the time. What's the purpose? What are we selling here? Are we selling, fear? Are we selling this idea that will catch you? And as you quite rightly said, humans are nimble. When we were told as employees that the emails would be monitored, most people just carried on, and the people that had something to hide would probably have moved off email, right? That's how that works. And so we're not really just trying to chase that. I think we're really trying to show that we care, to your point. I love that. I had the good fortune of meeting some of your employees last week in London. And certainly, and I don't think you paid them to say this thing, so we'll see. They certainly described you and Anna, your partner in life and partner in business, as a company that cares. They felt very comfortable with the culture that you've provided and very comfortable speaking up to you. You've created this rare psychological safety inside Umony, which is ironic when your very business is about monitoring communications or surveillance.
True.
How were you able to do that? What did you and Anna, if you can, I don't know if it was intentional or luck, but tell me, what's the secret sauce there? Because that's something I think we all want to aspire to.
You know what? Again, I don't know. I think we always try and do the right thing by the team, by our clients, by everyone that we do business with. It's a very, very simple philosophy. I think it comes maybe from having had previous businesses, understanding, particularly when you're smaller, how big companies might treat you and learning from that and making sure we never become that thing. And having had jobs myself, and I've had bad bosses and good bosses, and so has Anna, and you learn from that. You learn from the fact that actually the good ones that nurture you and are decent and nice to you, basically, you perform the best for. So actually, it makes perfect business sense to have a really nice, relaxed, easygoing culture where people do feel that they're in a safe environment. And I'd like to think my team knows that I have their back. And that's a really important thing. I learned that from a friend of mine that used to be in the military. It's like he was, I can't remember his rank, but he was senior. And he said to me once, my job is if one of my men is behind enemy lines getting shot at, my job is to go in and get him out and pull him out. And I love that. It's a leadership style of my job is to protect you and make sure you can do your job. And that's it. So I guess it's some kind of amalgam of all of those things. But I wish I could distill it into a paragraph for you. And it's partly personality.
Yes, it's partly personality, partly intent, right? This idea of care and understanding of what makes humans tick. It is really important because, again, the tooling, the monitoring, the insights only really tell the truth of what's happening, right? But really, you have to be intentional about how you create that culture first. True. The real prevention is the creation of the culture, not the tracking of it. I think that's a fair thing to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it.
So let's go a little bit deeper into what you have created here. Let's see if I can get some stories from you. Can you share a story where analyzing communications actually reveals something unexpected about culture or behavior that may have changed how a company operated or a CEO made decisions?
It's a really interesting question. I'm not sure that I can give you a specific example where I know it changed something inside a firm because we may not always hear that back from a customer. But there are some ones which over the last couple of years have really interested me, which I think probably did, and actually were not related to compliance. Were partly to do with governance. One was an employee acting unprofessionally on a phone call, lots of swearing, all of that sort of stuff. Nothing bad. Our system red flagged it. And in subsequent conversations, because it was originally seen as a bit of a false alert, because, that kind of trade banter and all of that stuff. But actually, it turned out that employee was on the edge of burnout. And that got highlighted internally into the firm. And they were able to step in and do something about it. We had this really interesting discussion about who else in the business needs to know about the insights we uncover. We're quite blinkered at the moment in our focus. We think we're a compliance product, and we are at our core a compliance product, but actually we uncover all kinds of things about user experience, how employees might be feeling, or edge of burnout, like in that example. So how do we get this data beyond the compliance team and into a broader, there's business insight and employee insight data here, which we know is valuable and we know will change processes and policies internally at the bank. I haven't got one I can say to you, Bank X, we highlighted this and they did Y, because I just don't tend to get that feedback from customers at the moment.
Understood.
But I know things like that happen and I think are really interesting to me. And I think we can make cultural change as a result of some of those things that we surfaced.
I mean, that's so insightful. And there's so much more trapped in the data that we said the truth is in the communications. Well, the truth about lots of things is in the communications.
Yes.
And I'm just going to stick with compliance for a second, because even as you use that example, it's an excellent one, this idea of burnout. One of the reasons I always talk about my compliance work being culture building, and I always say 80% of it is culture building, is because if you're trying to get to the root cause of behaviors, you have to look at the conditions in which people are working, right? And it's not a stretch to say somebody that's experiencing burnout is probably not best placed to make decisions in the moment. It's not a strict correlation, but you can certainly see how those conditions could mean that we are not our best selves when we're making decisions, and these things can spiral out of control. So yeah, very useful insights. And it brings me to my next question, really, about the role of artificial intelligence. So I've understood from you, with the volumes now, artificial intelligence is going to be able to help us there, right? We can see a lot more. We can collect 100% of communications and analyze them quickly. But am I also right, Dean? I'd love you to talk about this idea of seeing around corners, sentiment analysis, early warning signs, indicators. Can the AI do that as well in your tool?
I think the answer to that is it depends. I think in certain circumstances, yes, it could provide early warning signals that something is going wrong or about to go badly wrong. I think more often than not, it's more like a LIBOR example we were talking about earlier, where the first few are going to sit through but be detected and escalated to a human who can then act on it and nip it in the bud. And so I think of it more about nipping it in the bud rather than cutting it off before it happens. I think there are some select examples where that might be possible. You may have traders talking about doing something, or you may see a trend in the way that they communicate as indicating they're going in a particular direction. I don't know that we've got enough data that shows that if people are talking about this kind of thing, it normally leads to this. If we had that type of data, it would be possible, very likely possible, to be able to train a model to detect that and become that early warning system. I don't think we're quite there yet. Not quite Office of Tree Crime just yet. I think it's good enough. I think it's good enough that you can detect something early and nip it in the butt. Right now, that's kind of a target. I think it's a solid target to have.
Yeah, that's plenty. I think you're right. Like, the specific insights and specific behaviors will sit in other places, and it's just a case of bringing them in. I mean, again, just thinking of my days as a prosecutor, one feature of a team about to commit insider trading was they'd start speaking in code, right? Suddenly they'd start be using code words. So again, depending on the circumstances, you may be able to find features of human behavior that are precursors to certain actions.
I think that's a great example. And that's the sort of thing in fact, we would, interestingly, today detect that, because communications that go into either a coded form of communication or actually a different language will flag. So we often see the calls start in English, go into something else in the middle, and we do actually detect that as a potential red flag. Sometimes there are two French people that were doing business in English and just go into French. It happens. But the coded one, that's a good example that's exactly the sort of thing that can be done now. But there are not many more examples than that yet. I'm not sure we have a rich enough data set to really train a model to get super smart and see the early signs of a trader going rogue.
I think that's fair. I wanted to ask you in a moment about the dangers of AI, but before I get to that, or, the risks maybe associated with using it. I want to talk about what you just said, super smart. Like there's this idea in my mind that with the technology, we are going to unleash human potential, and that compliance officers like myself can maybe start focusing on the behavioral signals of bad behavior, as opposed to, word searches, control finds on large data sets. Because the technology can do the stuff that has been my day job, I now might be able to do the research or get the experts in the room to find out, what sorts of early indicators might I be looking for certain types of behavior that I'm trying to prevent or detect. So, and that, again, both green and red, right? If I'm looking for a trend upwards, what sort of ways can I measure it on the way up? What sort of ways can I spot it on the way down? So yeah, I love that idea of becoming super smart. Like the technology will allow us to focus more on that type of thing. And then hopefully...
the great thing about our industry is because of the fact that we have to record these communications, or firms have to record these communications for 7 years, there's a fabulous data set there. And there's value in that data, in mining it and taking all of the ones that went bad and taking all of the ones that were good and using that to train on a model of here's what bad looks like, here's what good looks like. That's what these very small modern large language models are really good at. So the data is there and is available. You'll be sitting on a lot of it. And a lot of the examples you've just given, you would be able to do that. You have the data set, I believe, to do that.
That's right. And we should, you make a good point, because the very capturing of the data is one of the things we've had the problem with to begin with, right? Like we're not even collecting that data. And you've done some innovative work with these telecommunications companies to find an efficient way to do that. Can you talk a bit about the capture piece? Because we're running ahead of ourselves a bit as to how we could use the data. But many of your customers need help just capturing the data effectively. Is that right?
Yeah, they do. I mean, it's interesting. There's so many ways we can communicate now, right? It's incredible. You and I can have a conversation on Twitter. We've got, 50 different apps we can message on. I've not even used this one before. One more on now, Riverside. We're communicating now and having a conversation now, right? So there's just an explosion of channels, and that is a problem. What we've noticed and therefore focused on, and I think this became even more so post-COVID, is that the mobile is ever more important. It used to be a very desk-bound process. Everything went mobile, and when everything went mobile, the mobile apps became the number one problem. So WhatsApp, WeChat in the Far East. And so it's an everlasting battle to keep up. And with the explosion of channels, yes, we have to try and be smart. What things can we do to try and capture as much as we can? How can we help firms to block the stuff that we can't? How can we monitor in the stuff we do capture evidenced that people are also talking elsewhere? Nice. If I'm in a conversation with you and I talk about the email I sent you last week, and there is no email in our systems that I sent you last week, did that go via my private email? Brilliant. That kind of thing. Or even a throwaway line like WhatsApp me, or I'll call you on the other line, or I'll meet you in the park bench. Those kind of things are evidence that you're going off to an unrecorded channel. I think it's going to be an ever increasingly difficult thing to do. We're going to be kept on our toes, I'm sure. I don't think we've seen the end of it. I don't think WhatsApp is the last big, chat application to come along. That it's going to be others. So yeah, that is a bit of a constant cat and mouse game. Not a lot that we can do other than when a new one starts to get serious traction, try and find ways to capture it for customers. And in the meantime, we use all the tools we do have to, like I say, monitor the recordings we do capture for evidence that there's other stuff going on.
Right. And look, like you said, the use of the mobile phone has become so ubiquitous that it is likely that there will be there's obviously tension between my right to privacy and, my willingness to allow myself to be monitored. But we know that there is leverage there. In some cases, it can be as simple as, if you want to work here, you will have your communications monitored. It can be the employment contract. In another case, because these things are so sticky, the apps, I use them so much that one of my companies said, oh, look, it's completely optional for us to monitor the work apps on your phone. But if you don't want us to monitor them, you can't access them from your phone. I'm like, hold on a second. All of a sudden, my habit of doing work through my phone trumped my worries about being monitored. And I said, yeah, go for it. And I signed up. Yeah. So I've given one example. How do you reconcile these tensions between growth, speed, keeping up with the applications, but also the privacy requirements, the issues that people feel uncomfortable with being monitored?
I think a big part of that is from a product design standpoint, empathy is the most important thing. Always try and be empathetic to the end user, the Hemma who might feel concerned that all of her personal communications are being monitored. And you start from there. It's kind of base zero. It's okay. What tools can we give Hemma to make her try and make her feel a bit more comfortable about that? One of the things we have in mobile voice recording product that we have is your ability to, during a call, you can do *1, and that tags that call, and therefore that call recording as personal. Now, it's still being recorded. Bank still has access to it, but there's an elevation of permissions required. Okay. So now that you've tagged that call as this is a personal call, I know you're recording it, and that's fine, but I just want you to know there are only certain people that are able to listen to that if it ever comes up into a surveillance or a monitoring scenario. I think that those are the kinds of things that we can do to try and ensure we fulfill the bank's regulatory requirements to capture everything, but to start to give you some level of comfort that that's okay. I think the other one is what we've talked about earlier around green flags, and that's the quid pro quo, right?
Yes.
Don't think of it as surveillance. Think of it as I've got machines, and most people feel more comfortable knowing that a machine is monitoring your communications than another human, to be honest.
Yeah.
But if you know that the machine is going to flag all of the good things that Hemma has done today, maybe you're incentivized to say, actually, I want my communications monitored because there's something in it for me. And as you say, that offsets my initial nervousness around privacy.
Yes, no, I think that's right. The motivations can be a trigger. A parallel example I can share with you is I allow my insurance company to track my driving with my mobile phone, and they only collect a little bit of data, right? They collect my braking speed, my acceleration speed, and maybe the time of day I drive. And again, it's a bit of an intrusion into my driving habits. Also, it has nudged my behavior to think about my braking speed and my acceleration speed, which in decades of driving, it wasn't something I was really thinking about. So it did provide a benefit to me. I'm a safer driver, but it was a behavioral nudge. I'm not ashamed to tell you the reason I allowed them to do it is because I got a whopping discount on my insurance. Right. There's also another lesser known reason is it allows to pitch myself against my husband so I can see if I'm a better driver than him on any one day.
I love it. No, you want
the great motivation, the gamification. But again, there are ways in which to provide a benefit to society, provide a benefit to me, motivate me to allow the monitoring. And then actually the monitoring made a big difference in my behaviors. And let's be fair, that's a lot of what it's about, right? You said it's not about catching people out, but it is about creating a culture of doing the right thing. And certainly that's a good example of Hemma was more likely to do the right thing in those conditions, where I knew I was being watched and I cared about the outcome of it. So yeah, really important. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit. As I said, you have reminded us that compliance isn't about catching people. It's really about listening, like really listening to what our communications say about who we are, what we value, what our instincts or intent is and what we're building together. I love that. So I think it's actually about leading with care. So my question to you, Dean, as a CEO of a company, done a couple of these now, I think, what advice would you give to leaders who want to listen more deeply to their organizations? And I don't mean just what people say in meetings, but what's really happening in the flow of communications.
That's a good question. You mean firms? You mean as in, I think probably it boils down to the green flag point. I know we've already spoken about it at length, but I think it's every CEO would want to know everything that's being done really well in his or her company. I certainly feel that. I think I want transparency. When something goes wrong, I want to know about it quickly. When things are going right, I want to know about it quickly. And I think it really boils down to that. It's about understanding your business. And as we talked about at the top of this, I don't think there's any more nuanced sense of intent other than communications. I think it's the number one. There's so much subtlety in language. I think it's the source of a lot of rich data that most CEOs would want to know about.
Right. It really is a goldmine that's been trapped really in this data that we've got a unique opportunity now to leverage and get, as we said, decision useful action insights. Yeah. Big tech has a big rap and you're clearly on your way to being big tech. What does it mean to build technology with care in this era where so many tools are optimized for speed and scale alone? Profit Profitability is obviously something we can go after, but how are you balancing that with making sure there's care in the product you're developing?
Again, empathy, and I think it's also craft. I want my team to feel proud of what they're building. And that takes care, it takes craft, it takes empathy for the end user, but it's the most rewarding thing that you can do. And I think that's what makes the team happy, is they're building something that actually they're proud of. And I think that that's key. So I think the challenge is going to come for us as we scale. How do we maintain that culture? It's not easy. Very few companies that I look at now that are very large have ever managed to maintain that culture when they started out that way small.
Right.
So that's my job now, is to scale it and maintain that culture of craft.
I love that, Dean. You're not only doing it for your team, but you're allowing other leaders to do it for their organizations and firms. It's wonderful. Maybe you've answered this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If legacy is about what we leave behind in the human systems that we've touched, what's the legacy you hope that you and Anna and Umony will leave?
I've never thought about that. I think I would like to be remembered for having always tried my best to do the right thing. It's an unselfish thing. He wasn't selfish. That's, I suppose, the legacy I'd like to leave. It wasn't all about me. I think it's very easy for people. There are a lot of CEOs who I know who are quite narcissistic. I think it's a typical trait. I really want to be the one that wasn't. The CEO that wasn't narcissistic. There you go. There's my legacy.
Okay, that might be the title of this episode. It's going to be called CEOs That Care, but we could probably go the other way. No, I love that. Well, Dean, you know, this podcast is called Unless because of the doctor's use quote from the Lorax. Unless someone like you, Dean, cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So thank you so much for joining me today, for sharing how you are changing, you know, companies one sale at a time, but also, you know, leading the way when it comes to building your own companies. We're very grateful for you for everything you've done. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.